Thank you all for joining us for the Anti-Racial Profiling Project launch webinar. As I see people coming in, I'll just give it one more minute before we officially start. All right, I see people are still rolling in, but let's go ahead and get started because we have a lot of speakers today. And so, hi everyone, thank you all for joining the Anti-Racial Profiling Project launch webinar. My name is Vivian Chung, and I am the program coordinator for the Anti-Racial Profiling Project at Asian Americans Advancing Justice, AAJC. I will briefly also introduce myself in Mandarin Chinese. 大家下午好，我叫常雪儿，是亚裔推进正义协会 AAJC 反对种族定性项目的项目专员。今天的研讨会将以英语展开，但我们的 PPT 呢中的内容都会以中英文对照的形式呈现。在会议结束后呢，会以邮件的形式发送给大家。今后该项目也会为大家提供更多的中英文的资源，所以呢，非常谢谢大家今天的参与。So Advancing Justice AAJC is a 501c3 nonprofit organization founded in 1991 in Washington, D.C. Our mission is to advance the civil and human rights for Asian Americans and to build and promote a fair and equitable society for all. So going into the Anti-Racial Profiling Project, it provides resources and legal referrals to people impacted by the government's increased efforts to target and profile Asian Americans and Asian immigrant scientists and researchers, particularly those of Chinese descent. And during this webinar, we will provide the historical context of scapegoating and racial profiling of Asian Americans and Asian immigrants in the US. Next, we will provide an overview, of course, of the Anti-Racial Profiling Project, including its three main pillars. And after that, we will focus on community impact, specifically on how the current landscape of government targeting of Asian scientists and researchers within academic and federal institutions has impacted our communities nationwide. And lastly, of course, include important information about our legal referral process and know your rights resources that are specific to scientists, researchers, and scholars. After this, we will have a Q&A at the end of the webinar, and please feel free to use the Q&A portal to ask your questions. Of course, if you have questions during the presentation, please also use the Q&A to send us your questions. That should be at the bottom of your screen. Please note that this webinar is closed to press today, but we have a recording of yesterday's press briefing that will be available on our website shortly. This webinar today will also be recorded. For legal and privacy purposes, I would like to ask that we please do not discuss your personal situation or provide any facts related to an investigation or pending litigation during this webinar. And all of the questions will be held at the end of the webinar. So moving on, today we are joined by my wonderful colleagues in Advancing Justice AAJC and APA Justice Task Force. They include Zhang Yang, the President and Executive Director of Advancing Justice AAJC, Dr. Jeremy S. Wu, former Director of the Office of Civil Rights and Acting Chief Statistician of the Department of Transportation. He is also the founder of APA Justice Task Force. And then moving on, myself, Vivian Chung, like I introduced myself previously, I'm the program coordinator of the Anti-Racial Profiling Project here at Advancing Justice AAJC. And then we have Gazella P. Kusakawa. She is the Napaba Law Foundation Community Law Fellow at Advancing Justice AAJC. And our first speaker today is Zhang Yang. He is the President and Executive Director of Advancing Justice AAJC in Washington, D.C. where he leads the organization's mission to advance the civil and human rights of Asian Americans and to build a fair and equitable society for all through policy advocacy, education, and litigation. Prior to advancing justice at AAJC, John served as a political appointee in the Obama administration, addressing U.S. trade and economics. He has worked also in China as the Asia Pacific Legal Director based in Shanghai of a Fortune 2000 company. And of course, as a partner at a large DC-based law firm. John also co-founded the Asian Pacific American Legal Resource Center, a nonprofit organization dedicated to addressing the legal needs of low-income Asian Pacific Americans in the DC metropolitan area. And I would like to also mention that John is fluent in Mandarin Chinese. So without further ado, let me turn it over to our first speaker, Zhang Yang.
Great, thank you very much, Vivian. 大家好，我的名字是杨正元，我是我们这边的智信董事，然后很高兴介绍我们这个项目。So I want to introduce this project, but more than anything, I really want to give some backdrop to why we are starting this project, what its importance is, and the historical context in which we are undertaking this project. So it's important to understand this historical context, because it comes at a time when we are seeing a lot of anti-China rhetoric, a very anti-Chinese environment. But the truth is that the history goes much longer than that with respect to discrimination of Asian Americans in the United States. And it's another unfortunate aspect of American history. Obviously, we celebrate the diversity of the United States, and it is important to us to talk about that diversity. But there also have been times when that diversity, when the history has fallen short. So if you think about it in terms of the Asian American context, it's important to remember that although Chinese Americans helped to build the Transcontinental Railroad in the 1860s, that also led in part to the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, which resulted in Chinese Americans and just more broadly Asian Americans not being allowed to come to this country. Then you fast forward to World War II, when you have the incarceration of Japanese Americans on so-called suspicions of loyalty to Japan, even though these were citizens of the United States and people that were born in the United States. Then we fast forward another 70 years to the post 9/11 age, when after 9/11, Arab, Middle Eastern, Muslim, South Asian Americans were targeted and unfortunately in a number of instances murdered because they were somehow thought to be associated with terrorists without any evidentiary basis. So that's one of the things that we have to make sure we consider as we think through this project and we think through this context that we're living in. You know, to use cliches, you know, some of these issues combine, this particular project really combines two stereotypes that we have to fight. One is this model minority myth that we have, that Asian Americans excel and overrepresent in STEM. And people sometimes use that as a basis for showing that we are somehow in a post-racial society and that America is not a racist society. And to show that somehow that, you know, that these racial relations have a different tilt. You know, that Asian Americans get used as a wedge against other communities of color. But on the other hand, while we are so-called model minority, we are also the yellow peril, that as you saw in the 1860s, 1880s, that we bring disease to the United States, or as in World War II or post 9/11, that we provide some sort of national security threat. And certainly today, we see the combination of both of these elements. You know, there's the rhetoric around COVID-19 that suggests that the Chinese are somehow bringing this disease to the United States, as well as the rhetoric around economic espionage, around the US-China foreign policy issues that are real. Now, I do want to be clear here. You know, the Communist Chinese Party is doing some things that are really terrible. You know, they are engaging in espionage, and there are elements that present real foreign policy disputes between the United States and the Chinese government. And some of what the Chinese government is doing is quite atrocious, whether we talk about the Muslims, the treatment of Muslims or the Uyghurs in Xinjiang, or press freedoms in Hong Kong, or the overall surveillance state that encompasses all of mainland China. But we can't let those aspects color and cause us to overreact here in the United States and take away due process protections of Chinese Americans here or Chinese scientists, Chinese academics. Yeah, it's also important that this isn't something that we're just seeing in this past administration. certainly this administration has increased the racist rhetoric that we've seen. So whether it is Director Chris Wray, the FBI director, that says that all persons of Chinese descent in almost every field office across the country of the FBI has seen counterintelligence risks in Chinese professors, scientists, and students across basically every discipline. Or President Trump saying that almost every student that comes over to this country from China is a spy. Obviously, these statements are inappropriate, feed on stereotypes, and are downright racist. But, history does go further than that. This history does also include Wen-Ho Lee during the Clinton administration. It includes Sherry Chen and Dr. Xiaoxing Xi during the Obama administration. So that context is important as well. The other context that's important is this anti-immigrant space that we are in right now, where you have an administration that is targeting immigrants, including immigration through family, including refugees, including separating children from their families at the borders. All of this environment is important as we undertake this project in figuring out how to defend the rights of immigrants, how to defend and protect the rights of Asian Americans here in the United States. One of the other recent developments that we should note as to why we are undertaking this project now is the so-called China Initiative that the Department of Justice has undertaken. The China Initiative seeks to put increased pressure on certain individuals that they think are spying on behalf of the Chinese government and trying to investigate individuals that they think may cause security concerns. But the reality is, as a result, a lot of people have been targeted. And the reality is, anytime initiatives like this are created by the Department of Justice, there's increased pressure by those law enforcement officials to meet quotas, to find targets, to justify their budgets in these investigations. So again, we have to worry about the due process rights, the civil rights of Asian Americans. So with all this in mind, that is why we have created this anti-racial profiling project, which my fellow speakers will talk more in detail about in a moment. But just at a very basic level, there's 3 pillars to this project. The first pillar is education. And when I say education, it is both education of the community, our Chinese American, Asian American community, specifically around knowing your rights, knowing what happens when the FBI comes knocking at your door, or DOJ asks to ask questions, or even if your university administrators, if you are in the university setting, starts to ask questions about your research, about your ties to China or other Asian countries, and knowing what you don't have to say. Part of that is ensuring that you have a lawyer for many of these situations, because a lot of these situations can involve innocent mistakes, but unfortunately, innocent mistakes can lead to criminal prosecution. The second pillar is legal referrals. And what I'm talking about here is, so if people understand that there is this need for a lawyer, it is also important to get the right lawyer. And to be clear, Asian Americans Advancing Justice, AAJC, is not in a position, we're not trying to be the lawyer for everyone. We can't be. We're a civil rights organization that's focused more on policy change and what we call impact litigation. But what we are trying to set up, what we are setting up, is this network of lawyers that can represent individuals and really provide the expertise that is necessary for representing individuals. As you might imagine, economic espionage cases, trade secret cases, these types of cases require a different level of expertise than, if you will, just a general criminal defense attorney, a public defender, or your commercial attorney that you might have for other types of transactions. So making sure that we have a set of trained lawyers that can help individuals navigate this legal process. And the final pillar is advocacy. And what I mean by advocacy is advocating on behalf of the Asian American community, on behalf of the scientific community, within decision makers and policymakers. That is with members of Congress, with particular agencies that have oversight over these types of investigations, to make sure they understand the concerns of our community, understand the implicit biases or the stereotypes that may be leading to the investigation of certain individuals, and to really provide that training, that understanding that's necessary to be smart about everything that is being done here. Again, it is not as if we are seeking to undermine real investigations. It is not as if we deny that there are real security threats that are here. But what we really need to do is make sure that we separate that fact from that fiction, to make sure that the fiction that all Chinese Americans, all Asian American scientists and students pose a threat, and really establish the fact that most of these individuals, the vast majority of these individuals, are here on purposes that help our economy, that help the American system in furthering innovation. So that's the theory. Those are the pillars behind this project. Very happy to have Dr. Wu, Vivian, and Gazella talk specifically about different elements of this project and how we're going to put this all together. Look forward to the conversation. Thank you very much for your interest in participating today.
Thank you, John, for providing a historical overview and introducing the broader framework of the Anti-Racial Profiling Project. We will be, of course, going into the details of the pillars later during the webinar. Our next speaker is Dr. Jeremy Wu, the former director of the Office of Civil Rights and acting chief statistician at the Department of Transportation. He has over 30 years of public service in U.S. Department of Agriculture, Energy, Transportation, and Commerce. He is also the founder of APA Justice Task Force, which is a volunteer group that works to address racial profiling and related justice and fairness issues for the Asian American community. Jeremy, welcome.
Thank you, Vivian, for your kind introduction. It's an honor for me to participate in today's first Anti-Racial Profiling Project webinar. It has taken a year from the time Queens College President Frank Wu introduced the concept, and former Committee of 100 Chair Clarence Kwan and others provided seed funding to the point where a talented staff is ready to start up the project. I thank John Yang and Advancing Justice, AAJC, for leading this important project and continuing the fight for civil rights and empowering Asian Americans to create a more just America for all. The APA Justice Task Force, including myself, Stephen Pei, and Vincent Wang, is proud to have played a facilitating role in the process. APA Justice was created in response to a call by Representative Judy Chu, chair of the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus, or CAPAC, in 2015. To be more precise, it was May 21st, 2015, when CAPAC hosted a press conference and called for the Department of Justice to investigate the case of Sherry Chan, a hydrologist at the National Weather Service who was accused of spying for China and then had her case dismissed without explanation. It was deeply troubling that in the wee hours of the same day, a dozen armed FBI agents busted into the home of Professor Xiaoxing Xi of Temple University to arrest him. Professor Xi was accused of spying for China, but his case was also dismissed later in September. In 2 short years, 4 innocent naturalized American citizens of Chinese origin in academia, federal government, and private industry were unjustly accused of betraying their country, the United States. Although their charges were dropped that confirmed their innocence, severe damage had already been inflicted to their finances, reputation, and career. They and their families were traumatized and scarred for the rest of their lives. APA Justice was loosely patterned after a similar group created under the Department of Energy's Task Force Against Racial Profiling in 1999, when Dr. Wenho Lee, a nuclear physicist at the Los Alamos National Laboratory, was accused of passing nuclear secrets to China. Dr. Lee was incarcerated in solitary confinement for 9 months, shackled with chains most of the day. The case against him eventually collapsed. On September 13, 20 years ago, Judge James Parker apologized to Dr. Lee. Dr. Lee walked out of the New Mexico courtroom a free man the same day. Now, according to the End Racial and Religious Profiling Act in Congress, the term racial profiling means the practice of a law enforcement agent or agency relying to any degree on actual or perceived race, ethnicity, national origin, religion, gender, gender identity, or sexual orientation in selecting which individual to subject to routine or spontaneous investigatory activities, or in deciding upon the scope and substance of law enforcement activity following the initial investigatory procedure. The standard response from the FBI and DOJ is that they do not investigate or prosecute based on any form of profiling. However, FBI Director Christopher Wray testified in a 2018 Senate hearing that China conducts spying in the US with, quote, non-traditional collectors, end quote. Now, those who follow Asian American history may recall the term 1,000 grains of sand during the Wenho Lee investigation. It was also the fifth column when 120,000 Japanese Americans were interned during World War II. The number of FBI investigations increased from several hundred in 2017 to over 1,000 in 2019. And this year, it has approached 2,500. Legal scholar and now litigator Andrew Kim conducted an empirical analysis of all known prosecutions under the Economic Espionage Act from its enactment in 1996 to 2015. His disturbing findings include, number one, as many as 1 in 5 Asian people prosecuted as spies may be innocent, a rate twice as large as for other races. Number two, defendants of Asian heritage convicted of espionage receive sentences over twice as severe as those of other ethnicities. And number three, there was an alarming trend of what is called pretextual prosecutions. As John mentioned earlier, DOJ started the China Initiative in November 2018 for the purported purpose of combating economic espionage and trade secret thefts. Now, in her paper titled Criminalizing China, Seton Hall law professor Maggie Lewis suggests that a country-neutral framework should be adopted for non-discrimination reasons. In this regard, China Initiative is as unacceptable and offensive as China virus. Available evidence show that only 1/3 of the China Initiative cases are actually based on economic espionage and trade secret charges. More than half are based on various minor or unrelated offenses such as fraud, making false statements, and administrative violations. Now, as Americans, we certainly want to protect economic security and intellectual properties of our nation. But we also hope that intelligence officials can do so without relying on stereotypes and generalizations against a whole group of people. We need the government to be transparent and accountable, not to misuse or abuse its authorities. As the FBI and DOJ dragnet expands with massive federal resources, publicity, and organization, confusion and a climate of fear have also grown within the Asian American community, especially for scientists, researchers, and students who are targeted. more and more innocent individuals fell victim to be unjustly investigated and prosecuted or serve as collateral damage or convenient scapegoats. The American legal system is complex by itself, and now the ground is shifting as US-China tension increases. Fundamental scientific exchange that was encouraged only a few years ago may now view as suspicious and even criminal. There are double standards. The checks and balance system is not working well. It is important for us to be informed and educated, as well as to seek legal assistance when appropriate. In the aftermath of the closure of China's consulate in Houston, FBI agents swept the local community and sought to interview individuals in an apparent search for, quote, spies. Community leaders, including AAJC, organized a webinar on understanding our rights in 3 days. More than 850 individuals attended the webinar to understand what to do if the FBI knocked on their doors. Now, when the government filed yet another superseding indictment against Kansas University professor Franklin Tao, John Yang spoke up and, quote, failure to disclose information on a university forum is not economic espionage. Xenophobia from leadership and agents within the US government has translated to real consequences for the Chinese and Asian American community. Chinese scientists and researchers like Dr. Tao are caught in DOJ's broad net for prosecutions and sudden criminalization of minor infractions, and we are deeply concerned with the pattern of misguided suspicion and racial discrimination we're seeing in these cases, end quote. John and Advancing Justice, AAJC, led a couple dozen organizations in filing an amicus brief to support the dismissal of the Tao case. We need to advocate not only in court, but also in media and Congress. We need to tell journalists and policymakers our side of the story. We need to stand up and speak out against racial profiling and for justice and fairness. A week after his case was dismissed in 2015, Professor Xi, who is also the recipient of the 2020 Andrei Sakharov Prize, jogged past the FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C. He wrote later, in quote, we need to get involved in the democratic process. If we see a bad policy, a bad practice that hurt our country, we need to speak out and let our voice be heard. That we have the right to do so is what this country is so great about. As a proud citizen, I pledge to do my part, end quote. Racial profiling is wrong. Time and again, racial profiling has shown to harm the long-term interests of America by forcing talented and renowned scientists, many of them naturalized US citizens, out of the country. A case in point, Dr. Xifeng Wu, a naturalized US citizen, is another victim of racial profiling. She was forced to leave MD Anderson Cancer Center in early 2019, and she became the Dean of Public Health in a university in China. Today, she offers valuable lessons to the global community, including the United States, to learn how to prevent and rebound from a pandemic like COVID-19. Education, advocacy, and legal referral are the three main pillars of the Anti-Racial Profiling Project. It is timely, it is substantive, it is actionable. You're not alone in the fight for justice and fairness. I urge all of you to participate and contribute actively and give the Anti-Racial Profiling Project your full support. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeremy, for sharing the brief history about how APA Justice came to be and the impact of racial profiling on communities across the country. We truly appreciate your tremendous support of this project. The Anti-Racial Profiling Project was launched in response to concerns from the community. And next, I will be going in further into detail regarding one of the key pillars of this project, which is the legal referral service. So the legal referral service serves to connect people impacted by racial profiling, particularly those working in field of science, to qualified and experienced attorneys. The legal referral service will provide people with general information about their rights, educational resources, and connect impacted people to attorneys who have experience with cases involving the targeting of Asian American and Asian immigrant scientists, scholars, and researchers, particularly those of Chinese descent. One very important thing to keep in mind is that the Anti-Racial Profiling Project staff do not provide direct representation, nor do we provide legal advice on individual cases. We are a referral service that connects impacted people to attorneys. And further on, so how does it work? First, there will be an intake process where a staff member from the Anti-Racial Profiling Project who works under the direction of Advancing Justice AAJC attorneys will ask you a few questions about your situation. Then, based on your situation, Advancing Justice AAJC will provide you with the appropriate legal referrals to connect you to attorneys who have experience specifically with this type of case. Then the legal referral service is available in both Mandarin Chinese and English. We have bilingual staff on the team who will be able to assist people in both languages. So, and how to reach us? To reach us, you please text the number shown on the slide here, the 202-935-6014 number via Signal, which is actually an encrypted messaging app. So please only text your name, phone number, and availability, and then a staff member from AAJC will contact you directly through the app. And the reason to why we use the app Signal is to better protect your privacy. We chose Signal because it is an app that's designed to never collect and store any sensitive information. Its messages and calls are end-to-end encrypted, and the app is free to use as well as free to download. The app can be found on Google Play Store or the Apple App Store. And we will also provide a download link at the end of the presentation in the additional information section. And if you are having trouble using Signal, getting on Signal, downloading Signal, and you're unable to contact us, let's say via Signal, the app, you can still text the same number with, again, only your name and number, and the staff from AAJC will contact you directly and help you get on the app. So Advancing Justice AAJC will not willingly disclose information about you or your case to anyone other than to the lawyer seeking to help you to find adequate representation. We will not even use your name with other lawyers without your permission in order to protect your confidentiality and your privacy. But in order to better do so, it is very, very important that you follow the following guidelines. So first, please do not provide us with information about your case in writing via email or text or at any point during this webinar through the chat box or through the Q&A box. For the initial intake process, when you first text us, using that number. Just provide your name and phone number as well as a good time to reach you. That will suffice. Again, please do not call Advancing Justice AAJC's general office line about your intake. We have specific staff members who actually work on this legal referral service. So please use the phone line designated for the legal referral service, the number that was shown in the slide before. And again, these slides will be emailed to you after the webinar, so you'll have them on hand, and the number is also available on our website. You can reach this number by texting through Signal or texting directly. Thirdly, please do not use your work phone, professional email, or other devices that's provided by your employer to communicate either with us or with your attorneys. It is best that you use your personal devices instead. And this is a brief overview of what the legal referral service offers. Of course, if anybody has any questions, we can answer those in the Q&A session, and I can provide more information. And in addition to the legal referral service, the Anti-Racial Profiling Project also holistically addresses the needs of the community by providing educational resources. So that leads us to our final speaker today, who is Gisela Kusakawa. She is the Napaba Law Foundation Community Law Fellow at Advancing Justice AAJC. Gisela is a leading advocate on the anti-racial profiling of Chinese scientists, researchers, and students. Her work laid the groundwork for the Anti-Racial Racial Profiling Project, dedicated to protecting the rights of Asian Americans unjustly targeted by the government. She will go over our Know Your Rights information, as well as share the project's advocacy work. So Gisela, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Vivian, for the introductions. And thank you, Jeremy, for sharing the deep impact on our communities and your dedicated and trailblazing work to combat racial profiling. As John mentioned, this project arose out of the needs and requests from community members and advocates with 3 important pillars. Today, I will focus on the pillar for education by providing Know Your Rights information and share resources and information at the end for those who are interested in seeing our advocacy work on this. Please sign up to receive Advancing Justice AAJC's emails on our website to receive updates when we post new advocacy resources. However, before going into our educational resources, once again, we do not provide legal representation, and the following information is general guidance, not particular legal advice for you or anyone's cases. If you contact us through the Signal app, we will connect you with attorneys and also share educational resources such as our Know Your Rights. Each individual case is different, and you should consult an attorney for your specific case. I will go through some of the highlights of our Know Your Rights fact sheet, but please check our full Know Your Rights document available on our webpage, which we will provide at the end. It is important that you empower yourself with knowledge. We will cover key information that will help you navigate difficult situations and help you better protect your rights. You very much hear this on TV, and it's true. You have the right to remain silent. But of course, in reality, this is difficult to execute. What does it mean in practice? Well, generally, you do not have to answer questions from law enforcement, though in some states you must give your legal name. Regardless of where you live, there is no harm in providing your name. It is best not to answer any questions without an attorney present. Which brings me to my next point. You have another important thing to remember is that you have the constitutional right to have an attorney present when being interviewed by law enforcement. Law enforcement may ask you, "Can I ask you a few questions?" Or they may just start asking you simple questions such as where you live. It is best not to answer questions without having an attorney present. You can exercise your right and let them know, "I want to have my attorney present before I answer any questions." This can be a stronger statement than simply saying, "I don't want to answer your questions." The reason behind this is that if you do say anything after stating you don't want to answer questions, then law enforcement may argue that you waived your rights. However, if you invoke your right to an attorney, a court may infer that any subsequent answers were coerced and not allow them to be used in court. You might think, but I haven't done anything wrong. Why do I need an attorney? Remember that having an attorney present is not an indication of guilt. Invoking the right to an attorney can help you protect your rights and avoid any confusion. Can I speak to law enforcement without an attorney? Yes, you do not have to exercise your right to remain silent or your right to an attorney. However, as you have probably heard, anything you say can and will be used against you in the court of law. You might think, oh, I made an honest mistake. However, even an honest mistake can result in you being charged for false statements. It is a federal crime to lie to FBI agents and law enforcement. Whatever you say to law enforcement must be truthful and accurate. It is best to contact your attorney before answering any questions. Having an attorney present can help avoid misunderstandings, regardless of whether you answer questions or not. After an encounter with law enforcement, you should still contact your attorney right away and let them know the questions that you were asked and explain what happened to them. It is important for you and your attorney to document what both you and the law enforcement said while it's still fresh in your mind. Additionally, don't forget to get business cards and information from law enforcement. Important information includes the agent's name, badge number, contact information, and their agency. You might feel a little intimidated, but it is perfectly fine to ask them, "Thank you, officer. Can I please have your business card?" Please keep these business cards for your attorney and for your records. Now, what do you do when law enforcement approaches you directly at your home? This, of course, can be very intimidating. Our home is a place of safety and comfort. It can be very easy to feel overwhelmed and scared when law enforcement comes knocking on your door. It is very important for you to not panic and stay calm. Remember your rights. Now, what do you do when they do come? You just need to be calm, step outside as soon as you can, and close your door behind you. Don't be intimidated. Ask for their credentials, and as I mentioned earlier, get their business cards for your records. Make sure that you close your door behind you, as allowing law enforcement past your door may be construed as you giving permission for them to enter and search your home. The FBI and law enforcement are not allowed to come knocking on your door They can do this at any time to request to question you or members of your household. It's very possible that they come early in the morning or late at night to catch you off guard. Stay calm. Law enforcement cannot enter your home unless they have a judicial warrant signed by a judge or get your permission or the permission of someone who lives with you. If they do have a search warrant, call your attorney immediately, and do not forget your right to remain silent and have an attorney. Just because law enforcement has a search warrant does not mean that you lose your rights. When there is a search warrant, make sure to read the warrant. A valid search warrant should have your address and what is allowed to be searched. What are some of the things you shouldn't do? Do not interfere with their execution of the search warrant, but also do not give law enforcement permission to search beyond what is already listed in the search warrant. Make sure to watch and document what is being searched. It is also good to let members of your household read our Know Your Rights resource available on our webpage. Now, what do I do if my employer, funders such as NIH or NSF or other government agencies approach or question me about any connections to China? you should contact an attorney. You must take it very seriously when funding agencies or your employer question you and approach you about any connections to China, as you may be under investigation. There could be very serious consequences, such as losing your job or your immigration status, or even the possibility of years in prison. Well, what if my employer's attorney is helping me? Even if your employer seeks to assist you, remember that their attorney does not represent you. Your interests and the university interests may not always align. Whenever a university official is speaking with you and a university general counsel is present, you should also have your own attorney. Generally, you should not try to represent yourself without an attorney. The law is a specialized area, and you will need legal experts to handle your case. Well, can I talk to my coworkers? You may feel tempted to reach out to your colleagues and peers to discuss any of the allegations that your university or government has against you. This could lead to complications. Although correspondences between you and your attorney are considered privileged, that is not true for the information that you share with your family, other than your legal spouse, friends, coworkers, and employers. On the other hand, your correspondence with your attorney is considered protected information, which brings us again to one of the biggest takeaways, which is it's very, very important that you have your own attorney to help you stay informed and better protect your rights. Lastly, I have here some of our advocacy work, including our recent amicus brief in support of Dr. Feng Tao, as well as FOIA records requests and previous testimonies. Our advocacy work, as well as our Know Your Rights, are all available on our webpage. I encourage you all to go to our webpage and see the resources that we have available and sign up to receive our emails for updates. Thank you all.
Thank you, Gisela, for providing a detailed and thorough explanation on the Know Your Rights information and for sharing the Anti-Racial Profiling Project's policy and advocacy work. So now we have about 12 minutes left and we will begin our Q&A session. Please use the Q&A portal to ask your questions and I will help direct them to our speakers. I do have a couple queued up here, but feel free to put your questions now in the Q&A box. And of course, we have been getting a couple of questions on the resources as well as the recording and presentation for this webinar. Those will be emailed out to all participants after the webinar. So that includes a recording of this webinar, that includes the presentation along with the additional information, AAJC's information and Know Your Rights resources. So we have one, let's see, question. I think this was directed at Dr. Jeremy Wu, but I think that perhaps Zhang Yang could also respond, is that regarding the prosecution. I think when Dr. Jeremy Wu was discussing, he asked, how do you explain these prosecutions, if not as political actions related to the anti-China environment, where China is a threat not because of anything it has done, but because it poses the threat of a counterexample of independent development. So I guess the question was more related to how do you explain the prosecutions of so many Asian Americans, specifically Chinese American and Chinese scientists, researchers, and scholars. So Zhang, do you want to take that first, and then I will let Jeremy respond to it as well?
Sure. I think there's a couple of things going on. One is anytime you have DOJ or FBI announce a public initiative, such as the China initiative, or make public statements as FBI Director Wray did, it places pressure on the line prosecutors, the staff, to produce results. It's just like anywhere else. If your boss says, we need to focus on X, you're going to focus on X. And as a result, that's going to create an additional level of prosecutions, an additional level of scrutiny. The second thing I think that is happening is, at a minimum, implicit bias. Maybe there are cases of explicit bias as well, where prosecutors and investigators are looking at the facts, they don't have a full cultural understanding, and it leads them to a place that otherwise they shouldn't go to. One easy example that's well documented in the judicial system is that Asian Americans, oftentimes when we deal with law enforcement, we tend not to look them directly in the eye. We might look down a little bit, look away a little bit, and that's done out of respect. It's not done to show that we are lying, but law enforcement oftentimes are taught that, if someone is not looking you directly in the eye, that is a sign that they are trying to lie. So that heightens their scrutiny of the situation and may lead to them to indict in a situation where they might not. So there are those elements that are happening. And once you start investigating, like with anything else, it is hard for these prosecutors not to make at least some sort of criminal charge. And so this goes to what Gisela was saying, is there are cases, and also Jeremy as well, there are cases that aren't based on Economic Espionage Act cases, but are based on failure to disclose. Now, I'm not saying that it's okay not to disclose something, or okay not to report your taxes. That's not okay. But that doesn't rise to a level typically where the FBI or the US attorney gets involved. That is something that is much more ministerial, might be an employment law issue, it might be a tax law issue, but it's not a criminal issue. And so that's the other area of prosecutions that we're seeing that are highly suspect in our analysis.
John, I think John's response was quite complete. If anything, I would suggest that every case is somewhat different. And in this case, I think the Department of Justice actually puts out a continuing progress report, case by case. And right now, there are about, I would say somewhere between 55 to 60 cases that they have listed. And one way that can be done objectively would be for the public, including you, to look at those listings, and then you can form your own judgment in that sense. And that's one part that I would add to. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. And next up, we do have a couple questions related specifically to the Know Your Rights. So one of them is, what if the individual does not have a personal lawyer? What should this person do and say when FBI knock on the door?
Even if you don't currently have an attorney, you can still exercise your right to have an attorney. So you can still remain silent. You don't have to answer any questions, as I mentioned, unless you're in specific states which require you to provide your legal name. There's no harm in providing your name. However, you can refuse to answer further questions. Let them know that you would like to have an attorney present and just collect a business card or their contact information. You can simply say that you'll have your attorney contact them later on. So just because you don't have an attorney now does not mean that you can't exercise that right.
Thank you, Gisela. There is also another question on, should we find the attorney in the local area, or does it really matter? So I guess this goes back to the legal referral service. Of course, if you utilize the legal referral service, we would be able to provide a recommendation and an attorney referral for you. And I don't know, Gisela, if you would like to touch on that.
Of course, it's very good to have an attorney in your geographical area. And when you reach out for a legal referral intake request, we will always take your geographical area into consideration. But also, one of our primary purpose for providing this legal referral network is really to make sure that you're connected to attorneys that have experience in these types of cases. As John mentioned, these cases are very complicated and it requires a lot of expertise. So it is in your interest to really connect with attorneys who have more experience, whether it be a research fraud case, or like what we had seen with Dr. Tao, a non-disclosure case.
Thank you, Gisela. And this next question, I guess, is more for either Dr. Jeremy Wu or for Zhang Yang, is that here in America, we celebrate Asian American Month, API. At the same time, we don't learn about the ugly history of racism towards Chinese Americans, especially with the current rhetoric we hear about COVID-19. How important is it for people in America to learn about racism towards Chinese Americans?
Perhaps let me start and then Jeremy could add on if he wants. I think it's very important to learn about racism towards Chinese Americans, but frankly, towards all communities. And I don't think there's enough education about racism towards the Black community, racism towards the Latino community either. And so it's part of what all of us should do better in learning about all these different aspects. So I don't want to limit it to Chinese Americans or Asian Americans. Certainly, you know, if people are looking for suggestions, there was a relatively recent PBS documentary or mini-series that did a good job of providing, I would say, an Asian America History 101 that for our community, but then to dig deeper after that and recognize that this is all part of this entire web of diversity that we're talking about, that we shouldn't focus just on the Asian American racism part, but some of the racism that all of our communities are facing and how we respond to that.
If I may add to that, there's actually a hot item off the press this morning that talks about the Chinese American Community Museum in Washington, D.C. And in fact, there's a network of museums across the country. In New York, there's MoCA, and they do collect, for example, whether it's Chinese and especially Asian American community history, it goes back almost 200 years. And one thing to emphasize, I think, as John mentioned, is that this is not just Chinese American community, and Chinese Americans and Asian Americans have been in the United States for a long time. We are part of the American history. And so I would cite that the museums would be one source, and I think education, anywhere from K to 12 and college level, there are Asian American studies. And so those are also resources. And when the Congress expressed regret about the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act, there's also a foundation that takes on the responsibility in terms of 1882 foundation that takes on the responsibility to educate about that part of history. So there's a lot of resources. It's more looking into them and actually reaching out and find out and learn.
Thank you, Jeremy. We do have 1 minute left, and I will, we have a couple of questions left, but I will select one that perhaps is a bit easier to answer. Someone asked, what are the differences of an FBI investigation versus a DOJ, Department of Justice investigation?
Well, the simple answer is DOJ is the entity that actually prosecutes cases. FBI only investigates a case. They, at a certain point, might turn over the evidence that they have found during the investigation to DOJ, and the DOJ will make a decision on whether to indict. They cooperate a lot, and there are times that DOJ will initiate an investigation and ask the FBI to get involved to gather further information. But those are, I would say that that's the key difference. But certainly from a community perspective, you should treat it the same with respect to needing a lawyer, recognizing your rights, and recognizing that you do not need to speak to them without a lawyer present.
Thank you, John. All right, it looks like we are at time. Thank you everyone for joining this webinar today. And I would just want to flag that you can find additional information on the following slide about the project, as well as know your rights and the legal referral services right here. So we will email this presentation to y'all so you guys can click right from the slides and be able to get right on. We have also provided our contact information on the following slide. However, if you're looking for a legal referral, please contact the legal referral service rather than us if you're making an intake request. If you're interested in setting up a Know Your Rights webinar for community members, please contact me, Vivian Chung, by email. If you would like to discuss any policy advocacy, please reach out to Gazella. I welcome you to sign up to our email list and to stay informed about any updates on the project. And I would like to thank all of our speakers today again for your contribution and participation. We will send the recording and the presentation slides to all the participants after the webinar. And thank you all. Have a good evening. Goodbye.